workshops really exist for an opportunity for the board to really delve into a particular topic and kind of learn about it, be trained on it, ask a lot of questions, kind of tear it apart. Issues typically that come to the board meeting are more for action and business. This is more information that we need to be able to do our job, or an opportunity for the board to work through issues. For example, if we were to have one on, if we want to have committees, we've had workshops on the truancy issue last fall, but we've also had workshops on how do we want to deal with the public engagement regarding the referendum. So it's an opportunity for the board to kind of roll up its sleeves and dig into something, I think is probably the best way to explain it, outside of the regular board meeting construct.
And how do the topics come to be?
They are not listed on the GC 6E, and I think that is a question I have as well, and so I will forward that question to our board president.
And one thing we talked about tonight, and that would be standards-based grading. I mean, maybe we could all become a little more informed about standards-based.
And I think there is one scheduled, isn't there?
That'll be next month.
Okay.
Okay.
Is there any way of, will that be taped or anything, or, because I obviously will not be here, and I'd like to really get more information on that.
All the workshops are still live streamed and
Okay.
recorded on our district YouTube channel, so you can access them at any time.
Thank you.
I will say that up until recently, workshops were usually that we left this table and we'd go into another room. It was still a public meeting, but the perception sometimes by the public wasn't that, and so since late last year or sometime in last year, we've been meeting in this room so that they can be taped. And actually, I think we've all heard at some of the input sessions that the public has appreciated that. I don't know who's watching them, God bless them for it. But the public has appreciated the board taking the extra effort to do that, so that's been a change in this. So with that, the topic this evening is the rights and responsibilities, and so I'll turn it over to Mr. Tuff.
Excellent. Okay, well, thanks for having me tonight. Tonight, we're going to visit with you, like we do annually, about our Student Code of Rights and Responsibilities. You should have an email close to the top of your inbox with a link to the student code, the full code. So as we're going through this, if you want to review that or take a look at some of the sections that I'm referencing, you are welcome to do that. Also passed around something new for this year is going to be a summary, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, why we created a shortened version of it, and it has a little bit to do with implementation, but you should have a couple resources to kind of follow along with. So want to start just with the purpose of the code. So every school district in Wisconsin, actually in the nation, is required to have some sort of code of conduct or handbook that governs student conduct. Our U.S. code, so federal law, references a code largely for protections, because there's a time in American history when schools kind of did what they want and had a long history of excluding students for various reasons, sometimes permanently without any sort of protections. And so Wisconsin statute requires that we have a law. We have administrative policy that says that we should have a code. And for us locally, really talks about this importance of how we spend our time with kids, helping them understand and teach those rules so we can maximize time in the classroom. The other reason that we have purpose in the code is really to create clarity and consistency across the district, not just in rules that we have that we're handing out, but these are shared rules. And so one of the themes that I hope that you take away with from this presentation is one of the questions that we ask every year from our community is this: how do you want your schools to be? And we use feedback on the code to get that. Asking students, what's important to you? Are there rules that we need to think about and adjust? Or are there things happening in the school that we need to think differently about? And the reason we do this is because we didn't always do this. This is an article from La Crosse Tribune, 1972, La Crosse Junior High School. I'll read the caption and a couple of signs. So La Crosse Junior high school girls protest ban on blue jeans and slacks. School officials promise new look at rule and readmit students to classes. So what you can assume is, gosh, at some point in history, this was a big deal for people. And you don't want to learn that you're out of touch with your community through La Crosse Tribune or other media, especially today.
I can tell you what this picture is. It wasn't until, because I was in junior high then too, and
Yeah.
girls could not wear slacks to school unless it was cold,
Mm-hmm.
a certain temperature, and certainly not jeans. And I remember when I was in 8th grade, the announcement that came through that girls could wear slacks to school. Like, that was probably 1972.
Sure.
So I wasn't in La Crosse schools as a GET, but
Yeah.
that was, I'm old enough that I couldn't even wear pants to school. So,
Yeah.
and I had a dial with a rotary dial, but anyway.
So some of the signs in here, pants, please. One of them, you like skirts, wear them. You know, so some of the roots of our advocacy out there, which is great. But again, far better off to be able to connect with our community, understand what's important to them, help build rules together so our schools can be safe. Here's a little history of our code. So, you know, when I took over the student code and in this kind of work, you get a bit of a time capsule. It's all the documents that are kind of assembled. Maybe Mr. Begnevsky remembers some of these time capsules of documents. Earliest code that we could find, 1991. You can see some of the groups, and it just kind of frames maybe at a certain time how we used to think about kids. But we had an inappropriate adolescence group. We had an aggression and discipline committee. You can just kind of get a sense of maybe what was on the minds of folks during that time. The code really went untouched for a long, long time. I've got a couple pictures of it. It used to be a flip chart here you can see on the top, and then the flip chart turned into a booklet. We had a big overhaul of our student code in 2019 and really brought together a student code committee, started talking with our community, and the board at that time liked what they saw so much that they said, hey, let's do this annually, and it's really been a positive thing for our community. Every year we talk about the student code and talk about what rules are important or adjustments we want to make to it, but we also take it as an opportunity to talk with our community, and by community I mean students, parents, families, and community partners, about pressing things that are important. So you can see some of the topics: address policy. In fact, after that first year, we had students saying, hey, you know, this dress policy not uniformly implemented. The rules are different for athletes than it is for other kids, and so we spent some time on that. We developed a district discipline philosophy, worked on some guidance. Last year, we got feedback on AODA needs within the community. It helped inform and develop our approach to supporting kids who are struggling with substance abuse or addiction issues. This year, we talked with our community about attendance. Just like we talked about in the last meeting, that's on people's minds, and we're trying to problem solve with our community on how to address that. Here's what we found about meaningful engagement. We get shifts, and you see this too. I mean, I hear you in board meetings, you know, how do we shift, you know, some of the perceptions, you know, where people might think the district is a bit of a mystery, or you've got suspicion, or there maybe isn't the trust you're looking for. Opening up these conversations with our community helps in all sorts of different ways. And the biggest thing is this shift of the district to our district. In fact, the work that gets done around the code and the feedback, part of my responsibility, I meet with students for disciplinary hearings or pre-expulsion meetings when big things happen in the district, and always frame like, this code, this is not my code, this is our community's code. You know, this is what parents want out of our schools. This is what other students are saying they want. So it just really builds a lot of clarity and credibility with the district. So it's been a super positive part of our work annually. Major sections of the code here you can see, these have developed over time. The most recent development was our district discipline philosophy, which really helps frame dispositions, practices, and systems that support positive behavior in our school district. We have a section on shared rights and responsibilities. That's an important section, mainly because you can't make a rule for everything. But these shared rights and responsibilities frame expectations we have, not just for students, but what does it look like for parents, and what does it look like for staff? How do we need to show up to be able to support kids? We talk about positive school cultures. That outlines some of the work we do around supporting positive behavior, social emotional learning, mental health supports. We outline a number of key district policies, rights and responsibilities. Doesn't include all of them, or they'd be as long as our policy handbook, but these are critical things. These are things that are coming up on a routine basis that we want to make sure are clear to our community. We frame standards of student behavior, so we have a framework for how we want our staff to think about behaviors, and they come on a continuum. They've got things that we don't want to have happen that only affect the student that's involved, all the way to things that are unsafe for others. And so we provide a way for our staff to think about that continuum of behaviors and how to approach that. So we're providing opportunities for restorative or intervention responses, as well as holding kids accountable for that sort of behavior. We've got information in the code to help protect students with disabilities. So there's special education and 504 protections that we outline. We outline the steps if parents have concerns or grievances, and we use this code even with parents, like, hey, if you don't think we're meeting the mark, we have responsibilities too. If you don't feel like we're bringing information to you in a timely way, or you're not being treated the way that you think you should, bring that to our attention. So we've outlined that, and then common terms and forms for bullying and harassment. So every year we design what this is going to look like because we meet with a lot of different groups. This was our design for this year. We use a compression planning design, which allows us to be able to go in, be able to outline purposes for why we're meeting with the group, give students background. So for this year, we were really after identifying root causes of student absenteeism, working to develop strategies to get kids back into school. We gave them some background, including sharing kind of our absenteeism current state with students, parents, and our community, so everyone knew what the trends have been, what the data is. Over here in the topic area, you can see the questions we asked. So topic 1, what's getting in the way of students attending school regularly? And we gave kids a chance and parents a chance to share what's really happening in the lives of students that's changed, especially since the pandemic. Topic 2, what ideas do you have to improve student attendance? We got a range of ideas that came from folks. Topic 3, anything you'd like to see added, changed, or removed. So that's kind of a little bit of open mic. And we get a little bit of everything in that answer, from lunch-size portions to school start times, and that's kind of a catch-all. And then this year we also asked students about safety and belonging. And we want to know, what about your school makes you feel safe and belong, even though maybe sometimes you don't feel safe or you don't always feel like you belong. So we got some great feedback on that. Here's a list of all the groups that we meet with. So we've got our student feedback sessions. I believe there's 16 of them total. Our community feedback session is a lot of representatives from youth serving organizations. So we've listed the folks who come and represent at that meeting. We meet with the district-wide parents group. We meet with the La Crosse Moms United group. It used to be called Southside Moms United, but that's a kind of a broader group. And then we meet with our own district staff to get feedback. Here's a snapshot of what we use. We use a tool called Padlet, so you can imagine this up on a big screen. We're asking questions as students answer. We're putting their answers in. We're moving them around. Sometimes we'll have people be able to react to answers within this tool, but kids get the experience of doing some strategic planning. We use the same thing for community strategic planning, but students get that experience of really being able to inform and advise on our student code. So what did folks say? Here's some summary. So we go in and we code and kind of theme all this feedback. As you can imagine, there's a lot of feedback to go through. But some of the things that our community shared with us about barriers to regular school attendance, lasting effects of COVID, and that's not a shocker to anyone. We know that chronic absenteeism nationally doubled following the pandemic, and we're still working our way out. We're a little bit better this past year than we were the year before, but still working on that. Grading, engagement in relationships. Kids talked about, maybe there is too much flexibility for kids, and if we had, these were students talking, higher expectations and accountability, that maybe it would make things make it more important for kids to be at school regularly. They talked about transportation issues. We're working on that. Round attendance, we developed a partnership with MTU, a Second Chance to School program, where students can jump on any city bus to get to school, even if it's a couple hours into the school day. We always share, like, don't lose the whole day. If you something happened and got in the way of getting to school on time, don't lose the whole day. Come to school whenever you can, and the MTU's been a great partner for that. Students have talked about start times and student activities getting in the way, lack of motivation, competing influences. Students were, one of the follow-up prompts that we ask is like, hey, when your friends aren't at school, what are they doing? And kids would talk about, sometimes they're home playing video games, or they're hanging with their friends, and so they talked about some of these competing influences that's getting in the way of kids being in the habit of getting back to school. Family issues and mental health issues. One of the things that students shared here, and then general feedback too, was sometimes the dynamic between older kids who are helping to support younger students get to school. So thinking about school start times where high school students working to get their elementary brother off to school, or even walking maybe a middle school sibling to school, and then just the timing's not quite right. So that's on our mind too. Ideas to improve attendance. Kenny had big buckets of this. Ideas around engagement. Students really talked about the importance of having variety of classes, interesting classes, being able to do fun activities. They talked a little bit about incentivizing attendance. Our high schools are partnered with Maury's Auto for an Attendance Matters campaign, powered by Maury's. That's been a good partnership for that, but thinking about, how do we incentivize regular school attendance, early outreach and interventions, what should things look like at the first sign of trouble? How do you think kids would respond? Reasonable accountability. This was a great conversation. We've had, just in terms of system partners, debate about, the role of ticketing or formal system involvement with absenteeism, and there's lots of different beliefs out there about that. But students really talked about that. We've had some students that have shared with us, listen, got easier and easier when I'd skip, and it didn't feel like there was going to be anything that was going to happen. Started as something small and kind of grew into something that even kind of overcame them. So great ideas that our community was able to share around that. Safety, belonging, and adjustments to the code. So some things that students talked about that helped them feel safe and belong. Importance of access to those clubs, sports activities. What they really talked about was it's a place to fit in outside of school, right? To have places where they can place their interest and time and make social connections. Social connectedness was part of that. Student-staff relationships. They really talked about how important it is for staff to be kind and welcoming and offer that extra help at school. They talked about rules and security, school rules, cameras, controlled building access. They talked, many of the students talked fondly about our school resource officers and had shared stories about that. And then some other considerations, having clean and aesthetically pleasing schools and bathrooms, and having positive connections to the community. And that one, a lot of times they reference like opportunities to take school out into the workplace. It really helps them feel like they belong in the community. So terrific insights with that. Adjustments to the code. Some of the feedback that we got, later start times for secondary, and that is on our radar. No cost meals, snacks, longer lunch periods. Usually middle school students talk about portion size or just kind of a hungrier group. Bathroom concerns. This kind of falls into some of the vaping increase, and we're still working on AODA issues, but what we don't have anymore is kids leaving school to smoke in the alley. With vapes, it's happening, you know, in less supervised areas, and bathrooms are difficult areas to supervise. So that is on our mind. We're working through that. Had some students talk about, you know, improving library access, flexible seating in the classrooms. A few older students talked about release time for 11th and 12th graders in good standing. Implementation of the code. So this has been very tricky. So we've been, you know, at this for a few years. To start, we had a link similar to the link that you received tonight that goes into our enrollment in summer enrollment. And what we had asked parents to do is read the code, visit with your student about it, and certify it by clicking. And what we found is, at least in disciplinary hearings, when I'm meeting with students, very few had ever seen it. And I always start with that. Like, have you ever seen this document? I want to make sure, you know some of the expectations. Nobody's seen it. We changed it to where the PDF need to be scrolled through, and then you got to it. And we did that, and same thing has kind of happened. We're still just not getting a lot of students that are getting this in front of them. So for this year, what you're seeing, what I handed out earlier, is a summary to the code. It's not a replacement of the code. I mean, just trying to boil down the essential elements. But we created a slide deck that we'll be taking out to all of our staff, and this will get presented to secondary students with the summary of the code. It's a 2-pager. Again, it's not a complete version, but we do want to get this on their radar. It's good for kids to know what's expected of them. It's good for them to know that these expectations the community created, and to really know, you know, what they need to do and some of the rules that they need to work with as they're in our schools. So that's one of the big adjustments that we're making this year. We will be translating this summary in a couple different languages. So we'll have Spanish and Hmong and you know, translated as needed if there's other languages. But anyway, it's been terrific process. You know, personally, it's one of my favorite things to do every year, because I get to see kids outside the context of disciplinary hearings, other things like that. Kids are terrific. They've got terrific insight. You know, even like the AODA issues, students were signaling to us, and part of the reason why we had it on, you know, for feedback, kids were signaling some of the issues before they even show up in our data, which is why it's so important to, you know, keep dialogue with our community on it. But this code is, you know, led to a lot of clarity in expectations. I've never come across people who don't feel like it's fair. You know, the families have been terrific, being able to visit with them about what's important, and you know, coming out of it, you know, my impression is, as a community, we're more alike than different. You know, every family wants their child to be successful, wants them to be in a safe school environment, wants to have them have opportunities to learn and grow and succeed, and the code is just a great environment, and getting feedback on the code's a great environment to hear that. So, but this is the 24-25 Code of Rights and Responsibilities, and wanted to present that with you tonight, and entertain any questions you might have.
This is maybe for the future. Would it be possible, when this is presented to us in draft form, to have changes from the previous version highlighted?
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if there are
Yeah.
significant changes. You outlined some areas which I think are all great
Yeah.
to be thinking about. Has any of that been implemented so far?
Which parts?
Like, so in like a slide or two ago, you had, you know, areas of adjustments to the code.
Oh, these are recommendations that came out of it. So
Okay.
some
in
of
your
the
current process.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so what we do with this code, so it's not just for the code. We tag and organize all this data. We distribute to the schools. We look at it as a cabinet as well. Some of those ideas will take a little bit of time, like exploring start times because of the implications on, you know, all sorts of things. But you know, some of the ideas around supports for attendance, for instance, we've talked with LPEF, and one of the adjustments going into this year is a strategy where we can kind of individualize supports using random acts of kindness to target. So where random acts has historically been student has some basic needs that we want to take care of, this would be a little bit more strategy focused, where we could still access random acts of kindness funds, but for targeted intervention for kids struggling with attendance.
So slightly less random acts of kindness.
Less random, yeah, strategic. Yeah, in talking with Nell, she felt like it still fit within the scope of what Random Acts was intended to do. Yeah, so it's not going to be at like a school-wide scale. We did explore some school-wide scale strategies, but for individual students. And sometimes the barriers that we run into with students are very closely fitted, where students do need an alarm clock or they do need a bus pass, and those are things that you know, are commonly supported by Random Acts. Yeah. Yeah.
I have to leave, so I apologize, but I just have one question quick. You have the later start times for secondary. Obviously, that's gonna be difficult to do because I think if they're dropping their kid or their brothers and sisters off at like middle school or grade school, they probably have to pick them up as well. So, I mean, how you gonna work that? You just thinking about having a shorter day for secondary? I mean, you know, there's got to have some little bit of give and take there somehow.
Yeah.
I know it's not easy, or
Yeah.
or are there? I mean, maybe they can fill out some paperwork and they're able to get out early or something. But
Yeah.
you have a lot of work to do with that one, I bet.
Oh,
It's-
absolutely. Yeah, and this is, just to be clear, these
Yeah.
are not our
Yeah.
strategies.
Yeah.
This is just feedback that we've gotten. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. There's a lot that goes into, so even sharing this, it's really at like an exploration, stage one. This is the feedback that we've gotten. What's possible, what makes sense. Yeah, there's a lot of things that go into it.
So I kind of am hearing from board members, like, there's a lot of movement, but like, you just haven't made the decision. Would you be able to come back and maybe give us some updates on what, you're waiting for the school year, and I understand all that.
Yeah.
Maybe give us some updates on where that's going, because I think we'd love to hear more about that. Were you gonna say something? Oh, okay.
Yeah, are you talking specifically the early start times?
I'm
Or
thinking some
you-
of these other adjustments that, that Dr. Sprague asked about as well. I think we're interested in, like, this is a big problem you're trying to solve, and,
Right.
and we're a partner in that, so maybe us hearing more about it might be helpful to know more.
Sure. Yeah, I'll give you an example, like the bathroom concerns, we are working with schools where we know that that's an issue. Some of the schools started even last semester implementing more targeted supervision, so having more, obviously you can't supervise inside bathrooms, but more presence around bathrooms to deter kids from spending time in there and congregating in there and keeping
And
movement going.
again, at
Yeah.
linkages, we heard very clearly from students at Logan and Central how unhappy they were with the bathroom
Absolutely.
situations and being closed and all those kind of things. So,
Yeah.
you're trying to handle some tough issues.
And then students lose their bathroom privileges if they're gone for more than 5 minutes. So when they have an upset stomach, they call home to come home.
Right.
Right,
And then that leads to the absenteeism problem.
yeah,
Because you're counting excused absences in the absenteeism numbers, right?
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know to what degree students are losing bathroom privileges. We do have some who end up having to use more supervised bathrooms, like office bathrooms, if they need to use the restroom.
Yeah, that, at Central, at least what I've been told, and it was confirmed by one of the office staff, that if they're gone for more than 5 minutes, they can lose their bathroom privileges.
Sure.
And that threat alone causes some students to just call home to go
Yeah.
home to,
Yeah, first I've heard of that. Yeah.
Mr. Bagneski, you had a question?
Yeah, just some comments. I
Yeah.
think one of the things that we sometimes gloss over, but that sense of belonging is absolutely crucial to
Mhm.
having kids attached to a school. And the more clubs you can have, the more
Absolutely.
whatever. And it's the whole purpose behind wearing a letter jacket or whatever. Hey, I belong to that school
Yep.
or whatever, and that's big. The other thing is, there's a thing that in third grade, if the kid isn't reading at third grade, you can see it in the kid's eyes. I'm different than the rest of you people. So, I would suggest if we're not doing it, give extra effort to making sure kids read at third grade.
Yeah.
You talk to reading teacher after reading teacher, and they'll talk about, look, that kid is not reading yet, and you can sense it in his behaviors, his mannerisms, whatever. And then in terms of not getting back the code or whatever, one of the things I found very successful would be that if we had a survey and were parent-teacher conferences, we didn't let parents leave the building until they filled out the survey.
Sure.
So if you had some parent-teacher activity or whatever, you say, you want to get out the door, would you please fill this out? And
Yeah.
it was amazing, how many times we got very close to 100%. So, do you still have discipline situations where you have Saturday school, in-school suspension, detentions, and things of that nature?
Yeah, not so much Saturday school, but everything else that you just outlined.
And there was, again, in terms of, the reason that comes to be in different articles is that if a kid is out of line and you suspend the kid out of school for 3 days, well, that's what I wanted. So you talk to the parent about, no, we're keeping them in school, but you have to show up on 3 Saturdays.
Right,
And so that was just another option to keep kids in school.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, and our code, and this outlines it in the section on behavior levels and responses, outlines that responses to unexpected behavior are kind of twofold. That restorative, how do you make it right? How do you hold students accountable? And we've got a lot of partnerships, and at some point we'll be talking to you about Fund 80, but holding kids accountable through interventions and supports. Sometimes restitution, which can take the form of helping her out around the school or cleaning up the mess they made. So it prioritizes those types of interventions first, and then traditional discipline when it's needed. And sometimes that's appropriate too, for kids to have to serve a detention, or sometimes students do need to be suspended from school temporarily.
How about, I've read in terms of schools having trouble with vaping in the restrooms and so on, and so they put in vaping sensors that they could then go off and let the office know that there's kids vaping in here.
Yeah.
Or are we going down that track, or no, we don't find them successful, or?
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about that. Schools that have implemented that, some of what they've shared is they're going off all the time.
Yeah.
One of the bigger issues is the congregation of kids in those less supervised areas, where even if they're going off, very difficult to detect who has it in those sorts of things. Also, I've read some stuff about damage to those sensors. They're just a cost of replacement or repair ongoing. If it goes off and there's a group of kids, and
They're still really easy to fool too.
Yeah.
And then there's the issue of like response times when it goes off by the time
Yeah.
somebody shows up to do something about it.
yeah.
Yeah. And how about cameras? You use cameras in certain areas to make sure that you see what's going on in the hallway or whatever?
Yep. All
Not
those
in
schools.
restrooms, obviously.
Not in the restrooms, that's
Yeah.
right. Not
That's
in
why I
locker
said
rooms,
hallway.
not in restrooms, yep.
There was, in the superintendent consent agenda tonight, the last attachment was related to updates, I believe, on a sexual harassment policy. Is any of that language included in the update to the code of conduct?
We have, we did not outline, you're talking the Title IX
Yeah.
Is that right? We didn't outline anything, so really not much has changed in terms of, Dr. Sprague's comment about what's changed. For this year, we did add back in one pattern of behavior that secondary schools were starting to see again that we removed actually a couple years ago because we didn't think it was an issue, is games of chance for money, like throwing dice and card games for money and those sorts of things. We did add that language back. It's not apparently evident, but people can't do those sorts of things. We get feedback from, or we get I guess, updates from places like Neola or the School Board Association or those sorts of entities on required information that needs to be in that code. And so we do have some non-discrimination, harassment, bullying. I haven't seen anything that's required related to Title IX that's at least come across the desk, but that could be something that we would add even mid-year if it needed to. But yeah, the only major change, we did move it from a Word document, which had some formatting challenges, into our Google Suite, which will make things run a bit smoother. But we just, for this year, added gambling or games of chance back in.
I hear pogs are back.
What's that?
Remember pogs?
Seriously?
We got in trouble for those a little bit.
Yeah.
How about you deal at all with the athletic code?
Athletic code has its own code that the athletic directors work on. So, athletes are obviously accountable to this code, but also accountable to their athletic code. Yeah.
I mean, how vaping, like everybody talks about vaping, but like how prevalent is it? I mean, when I was in high school, 40 kids would just walk across the street and smoke in front of it.
Yeah.
So,
We would
Is
just,
it-
not we, but our class right in front of the building.
that's what I mean is like, I mean, we make an issue, and I know obviously you can't do that inside the school, but
Mhm.
obviously it's a lot easier with vaping. But
Yeah.
how big of a problem in your opinion is it?
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak to the referrals that we see. I do have a slide deck with all of our discipline committee, and we map that out. The increase that we saw in what we call substance abuse or misuse types of referrals, which could be possession, use of any prohibited substance, the vast majority of those were vaping accounts for the increase. And I think a lot of it has to do with accessibility. We've talked with families about it even last year. There are differing perspectives on that. I mean, it's become, even in terms of marijuana use, there's evolving beliefs within families about what's right, and
We saw something a couple months ago, at least it probably was, that referenced parents giving their kids vape devices.
Yeah.
And I can't imagine doing that myself, but
Yeah.
as you're right, as perceptions and things evolve,
yeah.
that's a reality we may have to reckon with, so.
Yeah, that was one of the things that we heard from secondary students last year when we worked on it is we were asking, what would be helpful for kids? And we've created pathways for an AODA assessment and pay for treatment and all that. But they said, what are you going to do about students who are getting this stuff from their parents? Is it just different perceptions of what's right and wrong and good and bad? And
Well,
that is a challenge.
Parents have historically, some parents, not many, but provided students with things that aren't great for them.
Mhm.
And the school decides what is a safe environment and what will be tolerated and
Yeah.
what won't. And so bending our needs to what some parents do, I think we don't want to ever compromise what's safe for students.
Yeah, yeah, we remain, and this is what we communicate, we remain a drug and substance-free environment. We can't bend on that, where
Right.
kids have a right, kids have a right to come to school without having to worry about that sort of thing or be affected by it.
I don't think that's the reality, though, at least at the middle and high school level, at least what my kids and their friends are reporting. Like, there's a fear of even going to the bathroom because of the groups of kids vaping in there are intimidating.
Yes.
And look at them like what are you doing in here? Are you gonna narc on us? Like, get
Yep.
out of here. And so, like, not even be able to feel like you can safely go to the bathroom at school, that's a major problem.
issue.
And it's not unique to this district, I'm
Right.
not trying to pick on you in any
Yeah.
way, shape, or form. Like, if we had the right answer, I'm sure we'd be getting calls from every district in the country.
Right?
But it is, we are not an alcohol and drug-free environment.
Right.
I think if Adam was here, he could talk a lot about it, because that's been
Yeah.
a big concern.
Mhm.
He's talked about that issue.
Yeah, and we've never denied that. I mean, we spent a whole year talking with our community about it and trying to sort it out.
It's a tough one.
Yeah, absolutely. Questions on the code?
Have you seen behavior increase, decrease in terms of, if I can go there, with or without SROs?
Related to law enforcement, I'd say kind of following the reduction of school resource officers, we also, calibrated what they're involved with. I know that, and I've got data slides on that, I don't have them with me, but, so I'm just gonna talk generally. We did see some increases in calls for service for a period of time. I think we're down this year. I think last year represented kind of a high water mark. Last year represented a kind of a high water mark for chronic absenteeism. We're down about 7 points this year on that. It was a high water mark for discipline referrals. I mean, in pre-expulsion, we went, pre-COVID, 5 or 6 fold increase, since before that.
Can I
So
ask
we're down a little bit, but what's all connected? A lot of that, what we're seeing within discipline is not law enforcement, not all law enforcement related issues. It just all kind of happened, and
Sometimes that person in the building can make all the difference in the world.
yeah, it can, and at the same time, if you ask our schools too, like, there are things that are going on, and hard to be everywhere at once,
I just wanted to ask you what you said, calls for service,
Yeah.
is that the kind of thing where in the past, a teacher or a staff member would be calling for the SRO to come and proceed with some kind of intervention, and that person no longer being available, a different kind of service is necessary?
Yeah, so call for services in our language, it's police, how they collect data. So
Okay.
anytime that they receive a call for service, could be, and again, our school resource officers aren't just handling stuff in our schools. They might be getting calls from out in the community or doing follow-up. But anything that generates a case number is considered a call for service. In our SRO MOU, we've always maintained an expectation that, our building administrators and staff would handle school discipline. I mean, it's why we developed the school justice partnership. We didn't want to unnecessarily expose students to the criminal justice system if it's not a justice issue. So that's always been a long-standing, process. And so, some of the elevation, you have more kids gone from school, you're gonna have more welfare checks, as well. If you have more, students who are bringing prohibited substances in, even if we're not ticketing them or charging them, when we have the police take those substances, that's gonna generate a call for service to collect those, things and dispose of them, so. Yeah, but we have a bigger slide deck that kind of outlines a lot of the SRO information too.
No, I just thought
Yeah.
maybe you'd say, yes, it went up, down, whatever.
Yeah,
Stayed
yeah.
about the same.
Yep. Yeah, I do think something changed in the pandemic. We've shared that. We've shared the same thing with mental health. Pandemic was difficult on everyone, for the kids who were supported and could have some of those challenges buffered by community supports or family supports. They're coming around. for kids who didn't have any way to buffer really difficult things going on in their life and community. That represents, 18 months of chronic exposure to really unhealthy things, and that has an effect, no doubt.
I'm just remembering some conversations over the past couple months about truancy and absenteeism, and that our current practice has not really been to issue tickets.
Yeah.
And has there been any further discussion around that?
Yeah, so we have a La Crosse County absenteeism committee. It's required by statute. We host it because we're the county seat. This has been statutorily, you're supposed to meet once every 4 years. We've met every year. So it's great participation, great connection with the community and our county school districts. If you've ever seen those banners hanging around that have all of our school district logos on it, that's all part of that partnership. We have 3 active work teams on that: prevention team, an early intervention team, and an intensive intervention team. The intensive intervention team is working on answering the question, what do we do with students who are missing catastrophic amounts of school? And so, long story short, there's a period of time where there was no truancy tickets and really no, just kind of a belief that maybe that just isn't the right thing for kids in our community. What we're finding is school districts and partners have, in some cases have really done everything that we can. And you can't feel comfortable having a student never attend school again, to kind of uphold this belief like we at least we kept them out of the system, because it's same pathway, right? It's ends up being not being able to graduate, everything that kind of comes along with that. So we've had good dialogue with our community. In narrow circumstances, we have checks and balances, but we will do first offense truancy. We will do contributing to truancy tickets for families where that's become clear. We work with the district attorney's office on educational neglect cases. We're working right now on building a chronic absenteeism review team to bring county stakeholders together to really review cases of catastrophic absenteeism. We have last year, so year before, forget the numbers, like I think it was like 350 students in our district who missed 50% or more of part or all of school days, which is catastrophic. Last year, that number was down to 229, which is better, but it's 200 students that are not on track to graduate. So it's a big deal. And so we're working on that, and but it's a lot of systems. We're trying to think about what school role, law enforcement role, court role, human service role, reach agreements on all that. So
Human Services has the youth justice, which really does a lot of the heavy piece of it with the district attorney bringing it to court.
yeah, so right now, La Crosse County, it is investing into our school justice partnership and system of care. So that system that used to go through habitual truancy in courts, right now is there may be exceptions, but it's pretty much limited to the voluntary pathway of an expanded system of care youth justice partnership. But what we're finding in that, and this is why we're having these discussions, is sometimes voluntary pathways can only go so far, right? Yeah, which is why we're trying to think about role formal systems and so.
And this isn't the only school district
No.
struggling with it. I was, as Human Services Director, part of that similar partnership up in Trumbull County. And even within school districts, there's different philosophies of throwing the book at them to helping them and to everything else in between. So it's a struggle. And
Yeah, and we're very much how can you not be? Graduated response, like make good assumptions, like the family's doing the best they can, or the student's doing the best they can, meet them where they're at, try to address barriers, but at some point you get to a point where like, this student, you are gonna permanently change this child's trajectory in life if somebody doesn't do something. That becomes a tough call.
I was at a training one time and a judge talked about the truancy, which seems to be like a trivial thing in courts. But she said she always felt it was one of the most important things she did because it was always the canary in the coal mine. As soon as a student starts being truant, there's something seriously going on in their life. And if we let this slide, we continue to let other things in their students' life slide.
Yeah.
Are you working in terms of mental health in all of this? I mean, the student's depressed, the student's whatever, and so is there a connection there?
Yeah, so right within our absentee, so we have a whole mental health framework, but specifically to attendance, that's one of the considerations. If one of the things getting in the way of the student being successful is mental health issues or struggling with anxiety or depression, we're connecting that student to care as part of that. And we've got some funding sources for that. We're working on a new partnership we presented here before on our student family assistance program. We're hoping to sustain that. That was Project Aware money, part of that big mental health grant that we had that ended, but we're working on a pathway to sustain that so that can continue. But yeah, if that becomes discovered and we work
Yeah.
on that. And
Good.
Other questions?
I'll just share one thing in terms of, I remember way back, the kid was disciplined, I mean, he was missing so much school that finally I did push the ticket thing. And so this was like on a Thursday. Monday, the student comes back to my office and he says, "Congratulations, Bagneski. You know that ticket you issued to me? My mother spent the weekend in jail. I hope you're happy." I mean, so I don't know.
yeah, yeah.
It was one of those things where you say, gosh darn it.
Yeah. Yeah, and our SROs are terrific. I mean, they will, even in ticketing situations, they will create, student can improve their attendance. They'll draft a plan with them where that ticket doesn't have to go anywhere, too.
Yep.
So they've got a little bit more flexibility, but, sometimes that is what captures people's attention. But it's definitely not our first.
Yep.
It's not a primary strategy, it's not even a big strategy, just part of it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Keep up the good work, Kurt.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for putting up with me.
You did a good job.